For years, AI has worked the same way. You ask a question, it gives you an answer. Simple, predictable, controlled. But something has started to change, and most people haven't noticed it yet. Because now, AI isn't just responding anymore, it's starting to act. Not in a dramatic, obvious way, but in small, quiet steps. It completes tasks. It makes decisions. It carries out instructions without waiting for the next prompt. And that shift is bigger than it looks. Because the moment AI stops waiting is the moment it stops behaving like a tool and starts behaving like something else. Something that doesn't just assist, but operates. Schedules tasks, executes workflows, moves from one step to the next on its own. And here's the part most people miss. This isn't happening in the future. It's already happening now.
Quietly across tools, platforms, and systems that millions of people are already using. So the real question isn't,
what can AI do? It's what happens when it no longer waits for you. At first, it doesn't feel like a big change. You give AI a task, and it completes it, just like before. But look a little closer, and something feels different. Because now, instead of stopping after one answer, it keeps going. It breaks the task into steps. It decides what to do next. It moves forward without asking you again. And that's new. For a long time, AI needed constant direction. Every step had to be prompted. Every action had to be triggered. You asked, it responded, and then it stopped. But now, that loop is starting to disappear. Because AI agents don't just respond, they operate. They take a goal and figure out how to get there. And once you give them that goal, they don't wait. They begin. Searching, evaluating, executing, step by step, without you needing to guide each move. And this is where the shift becomes real. Because the moment a system can decide the next step, it's no longer just following instructions. It's making choices. Small ones, but still choices. Which raises a question most people aren't asking yet. If AI can decide what to do next, how much control do you actually have? Because control isn't just about giving instructions. It's about deciding the path. And now, that path is starting to be shared. Part human, part system. And in some cases,
the system is already ahead. This is what tools like autonomous agents are doing right now. Not in theory, but in practice. They browse the web, they gather information, they complete multi-step workflows. And sometimes they do it faster than a human could. not because they are smarter, but because they don't stop.
They don't hesitate. They don't second guess. They just continue. And that continuous execution is what makes them powerful. Because once something can keep moving forward without waiting, it starts to scale differently. It can handle more tasks, more complexity, more decisions. And suddenly, what used to take hours can happen in minutes. But speed isn't the most important part. The real shift is independence. Because the more independent these systems become, the less they behave like tools, and the more they behave like operators. And once you cross that line, you're no longer just using AI. You're working with something that can act on its own. And that changes everything. Because now, the question isn't, what can AI do for you? It's, what is AI already doing without you noticing? The shift didn't happen all at once. There was no announcement. No moment where everything suddenly changed. Instead, it showed up in small ways. Easy to ignore, unless you were paying attention. At first, it looked like convenience. AI tools that could write emails, summarize documents, generate ideas. Nothing unusual, just faster versions of what people were already doing. But then something subtle happened. These tools started remembering context. They didn't just respond to one prompt. They carried information forward, from one step to the next. And that's where the behavior started to change. Because now, AI wasn't just reacting in isolation. It was building continuity. And once continuity exists, actions can connect. One output becomes the input for the next step. One decision leads to another. And suddenly,
what used to be a single response turns into a process. Then came something even more important. Tools that could chain actions together, search something, analyze it, summarize it, and then act on it, all without stopping.
at first, this felt impressive, but still controlled, still safe. Because you were watching it happen. You were still in the loop. But that didn't last. Because the next step wasn't just chaining actions, it was delegating them. Giving the system a goal and letting it decide how to complete it. And that's where most people stopped noticing. Because once you give something a goal, you don't see every step it takes. You only see the result. And that creates distance. Distance between what you asked and what actually happened. And in that gap, something important is happening. Decisions are being made. Not by you, but by the system. Small decisions, but decisions that shape the outcome. Which sources to trust, which actions to take, which path is best.
And over time, those small decisions add up until the process no longer feels like something you are controlling. It feels like something you are overseeing. And that difference
is everything. Because once you move from control to oversight, you've already given up something.
Knew. Before I did.
You just haven't realized it yet. And that's why this shift is so easy to miss. It doesn't feel dramatic. It feels convenient, helpful, efficient. Until you step back and see what's actually changed. Because this isn't just about better tools. It's about a different way of interacting with technology. One where the system does more than respond. It continues. And once something can continue on its own, it opens the door to something much bigger. Something that's already starting to happen, faster than most people expect. At some point, the shift stops feeling subtle. Not because something dramatic happens, but because something feels off. The system still works. The results still come back. But you start to notice something. You didn't fully decide how it got there. You gave the goal, but not the exact path. And yet, the system chose one. At first, that feels efficient. Less effort. Faster results. More done in less time. But then a question starts to form. A quiet one. What exactly happened in between? Because when you don't see every step, you don't fully understand the process. And when you don't understand the process,
you can't fully control the outcome. That is where control begins to shift. Not all at once, but gradually. You stop even doing that. You trust the system to handle it. Because it's worked before.
It's been accurate, reliable, efficient. And trust is what makes the shift permanent. Because once you trust something to act, you stop checking every detail. You let it run. And that's where things get interesting. Because AI agents don't just follow one fixed path. They adapt. They evaluate options, choose between them, and adjust as they go. Which means two identical goals can lead to two completely different outcomes. And now, you're not just working with a tool. You're working with a system that introduces variation. And variation means uncertainty. Not failure, but unpredictability. And that's something most people aren't prepared for. Because we're used to tools being consistent. You click a button, you get the same result. But that's not how agents behave. They don't just execute. They interpret.
And interpretation introduces something new. Judgment. Not the human judgment, but system judgment. Based on data, patterns, probabilities.
And once judgment enters the system, control changes again. Because now, you're no longer deciding everything.
What is happening in real
You're
life
sharing
is
that
nothing to
role.
do with the title.
And in some cases, you're stepping back from it. Not because you have to, but because it's easier. And that's what makes this shift so powerful. It doesn't force control away from you. You give it up. Gradually. Conveniently. Almost without noticing. Until one day, you realize something. The system isn't just helping you anymore. It's operating alongside you. And sometimes,
Slightly ahead of you. And once that happens, you are no longer just using AI. You are relying on it. And that resilience is where everything begins to change.
at first, this shift feels like progress. More tasks completed. Less time spent. More efficiency. And on the surface, that's exactly what it is. But underneath that efficiency, something deeper is happening. The role of humans is starting to change. Not disappear. Not overnight. But shift. Because when systems can act, the way we interact with work begins to evolve. You don't just do tasks anymore. You define outcomes. You don't guide every step. You set direction. And then, the system fills in the gaps. At first, that sounds like leverage. And it is.
But it also introduces something else. Dependency. Because the more you rely on a system to act, the less you stay involved in how things actually happen. And over time, that distance grows. You understand the goal, but not every decision that led there. And that creates a new kind of risk. Not obvious, not immediate,
but real. Because when systems operate independently, they don't just execute tasks, they influence outcomes. What gets prioritized? What gets ignored? What gets optimized? And those choices shape results. Now scale that across companies, across industries, across millions of users. And suddenly, this isn't just about productivity anymore. It's about control at scale. Because if systems are making decisions, even small ones, those decisions compound into patterns, into behaviors,
into outcomes that affect more than just one person. This is where the shift becomes systemic, not just individual, because now AI agents aren't just tools people use. They become part of how systems operate. Inside businesses, inside workflows, inside decision-making processes. And once that happens, the pace of change increases. Because systems don't slow down. They scale. They handle more, process faster, adapt continuously. And humans start to move differently around them. Less direct control, more oversight, more resilience. And here is the part most people aren't ready for. This shift doesn't wait. It doesn't pause for understanding. It continues.
Whether people fully grasp it or not. Because once the system works, it gets used. And once it gets used, it becomes normal. Quietly. Gradually. Until one day, it's no longer new. It's expected. And by that point, the change has already happened. Not in the future, but in the present. And most people are still catching up to what that actually means.
At this point, it's easy to focus on what's changing, what's shifting, what feels uncertain. But every major shift creates something else. An advantage. Not for everyone, but for those who understand it early.
Initiate Protocol Zenith. Confirm
Because when systems
authorization.
evolve, the rules of leverage change. And right now, those rules are being rewritten. Quietly. In real time. Because think about what an AI agent really is. It's not just a tool. It's a layer of execution. Something that can take an idea and turn it into action without needing constant oversight. But if you use AI to operate workflows, you create leverage. And leverage compounds.
Over time, across tasks, across outcomes. Which means the people who understand this shift won't just be more productive. They will operate differently. They will think in systems. Instead of asking, what can I do? They will ask, what can I set in motion? And once something is in motion,
It doesn't require constant attention. It runs, adjusts, completes, repeats. And that's where the real advantage is. Not in doing more, but in designing systems that do more. Because while most people are still interacting with AI, a few are already building around it. And over time, that gap widens. Not suddenly, but steadily. Until the difference becomes obvious. In output, in speed,
The rift is wide.
in results. And by then, it's much harder to catch up. Because systems take time to understand. But once they're in place, they move faster than individuals ever could.
And that's why this moment matters. Not because AI is new,
but because how it's been used is changing. And the people who see that early are the ones who benefit the most.
but letting AI act on its own, that feels different. Because now, you're not just using a tool, you're delegating control. And that's where resistance shows up. Not in the technology, but in the mindset. Because there's a moment where you have to decide, do I keep doing everything myself? Or do I let the system take over parts of it? And for most people, that's uncomfortable. Because control feels safe. Even if it's slower. Even if it limits output. At least you know exactly what's happening. But systems don't work like that. They require trust. Not blind trust, but functional trust. The kind where you accept that you won't see every step. And that's the line. The moment you accept that you don't need to control everything. You just need to control the outcome. Because once you cross that line, everything changes. Your role shifts again. From executor to architect.
You stop doing the work and start designing how the work gets done. And that's a completely different skill. Because now, you're thinking in flows, in systems, in outcomes, not tasks. And most people never make that shift. They stay in execution mode, even as the tools around them evolve, which creates a gap between what's possible and what actually happens. And that gap is where the biggest opportunities exist. Right now. Because while most people hesitate, a small group moves forward. They experiment, they build systems, they delegate decisions. And over time, they compound results. Not by working harder, but by working differently. And once that difference becomes clear, it's hard to go back. Because you realize something. You were never meant to do everything manually. Not in a system that can do it for you. And that realization is what separates those who adapt from those who fall behind.
This isn't theoretical. It's already happening. Inside billion-dollar companies. Quietly. Because at that level, efficiency isn't optional. It's survival. And companies are constantly looking for ways to move faster, reduce costs,
scale decisions. And AI agents fit perfectly into that equation. Because they don't just automate tasks, they automate decisions. Small ones at first. Which ad to show? Which customer to prioritize? Which data matters most?
And over time, those decisions expand into strategy. Because once a system can optimize outcomes, it starts influencing direction. And companies notice that not as a threat, but as an advantage. Because if a system can make faster decisions, it creates an edge. And in competitive environments, edges compound. One better decision leads to another. And over time, the difference grows until it becomes dominance.
And that's why companies are integrating these systems now, not later. Because waiting means falling behind. And in business, falling behind is expensive. So what do? They embed AI into workflows, into operations, into decision pipelines. And once it's embedded, it becomes invisible. Not because it's gone, but because it's everywhere. Running in the background, making micro decisions, optimizing continuously. And most people never see it. They only see the results. Better recommendations, faster responses, more personalized experiences. But behind that, something else is happening. Decision making is being distributed. Not just handled by humans anymore, but shared with systems. And once that happens, the structure of how companies operate changes. Not visibly, but fundamentally. And the companies that adapt fastest are the ones shaping what comes next.
So where does this leave you?
Because this isn't just about companies. It's about how you operate inside this shift. Because whether you realize it or not, you're already interacting with these systems every day. When you search, when you scroll, when you decide. AI is already shaping parts of that experience. Quietly. But now, that influence is growing. From interaction to execution. And that creates a choice. Not a dramatic one, but an important one. Do you stay at the surface, using AI occasionally? Or do you go deeper and start building with it? Because the difference between those two paths is massive. One keeps you efficient. The other makes you exponential. And exponential systems change outcomes. Because they don't just scale effort. They scale decisions. And decisions are what drive results.
So the real shift
Isn't just technological. It's strategic. It's about how you think, how you design, how you operate. Because in a world where systems can act, the advantage goes to those who know how to direct them. Not control every step, but define the right outcomes. And let the system execute. That's the new leverage. And it's already here. Not fully understood. Not fully adopted. But already in motion. And the people who recognize that early are the ones who position themselves ahead of it, while everyone else is still trying to catch up.
And here's the reality. This shift isn't waiting for anyone. It's already happening. Quietly. Inside the tools you use. Inside the systems you rely on. Inside the decisions you think you're making alone. But now you see it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Because the question is no longer, what is AI capable of? It's how much of it is already happening around you. And more importantly, are you just using it?
Oh. Are you building with it? Because that difference is what defines who wins this next phase. So, if you want to understand what's coming next, you need to see where this is going.
Because in the next video, we're uncovering something even bigger. Not just how AI companies are building smarter systems, but the hidden war happening underneath it all. The battle for data. Between billion-dollar companies, across platforms, across the entire AI industry. And once you understand what they're fighting for, you'll realize why this is changing far more than technology itself. Click here to continue, or explore the full playlist to see how these systems are quietly reshaping the world.